why games are so hard to make. This is a series we've been doing off and on for a while now, and I wanted to actually go into an interesting transition here, because I want to start talking more about the Marvel Spider-Man game, its potential sequel, and other things going on with that in the future, and I figured what better way to sort of lead into that than to talk about why a good or great or amazing Spider-Man game is so hard to make. Because here's the thing, Spider-Man's had a really checkered and long history with video games. I mean, it's obvious anyone can make a Spider-Man game. A game. Not to just completely discount a lot of these creators, but he has had a lot. Spidey's had over 30 games so far, not including appearances in games like Marvel vs. Capcom, or the multiple versions of games like Spider-Man 3, where it had different versions on different handhelds, even had different versions, different consoles had different versions between the like next gen at that time and the current gen at that time, or the last gen. There have been a lot of Spider-Man games, some of them the same in name, some different, but most are not amazing. Most are either fine, okay, or it was good, it was fun. And out of a lot of games, especially superhero games back in the day, that was actually more than most people were asking for. You have to remember that before like current day, before around the time when Arkham started pumping out a lot of great games, there weren't actually tons of good superhero games. They were few and far between, especially when it came to Spidey. So looking through his past games, if we just look through a few of them, just way back in 1982, you obviously had Spider-Man. Jumping ahead, and again, yes, am I looking at the Wikipedia timeline? Yes, I am, but I just think this actually does help illustrate the point. He appeared in 84's Quest Probe as the main character. It wasn't just an appearance, though, that was the main character. And then he showed up again in 89's The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America and Doctor Doom's Revenge. A lot of these games were actually not considered good or great games, though, until we started getting into like 94-ish with Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage, and 95 with Spider-Man Venom Separation Anxiety. Those were sort of where you started to see really good games kind of take off in terms of Spider-Man, or at least what were considered at the time really good games. In 2000, you probably have the biggest appealing Spider-Man game up to that point with just Spider-Man, and then obviously Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro in 2001, the sequel. These are both on the PlayStation 1, followed by the Raimi games and Ultimate Spider-Man. This is where Spider-Man started to hit his stride, sort of falling off at around Spider-Man 3, having some issues. Web of Shadows is considered pretty good by a lot of people. Shattered Dimensions and Edge of Time are very disputed in terms of their quality depending on who you ask. And The Amazing Spider-Man, the first game that I enjoyed and played through on this channel. So what I'm saying is that this is a historied series that has had a lot of ups and downs. Why is that? I think a lot of this comes down to technology. Technology up until the current or last generation of consoles really didn't support the idea of Spider-Man on a grand scale. Now, what do you mean by that, Jay? I mean, you can scale down Spider-Man, can't you? Yeah, you can. You certainly can scale down Spider-Man to something like a simple beat 'em up. Maximum Carnage was able to do that. No hate on it. But the thing is that there's not a lot that separates Maximum Carnage from other beat 'em ups at the time. It's a beat 'em up. It's a good game. But like, it doesn't really feel like a grand Spider-Man game. It's just a beat 'em up with Spider-Man as the main character, going up against a lot of random enemies and a few actual bosses. This was a Spider-Man skinned, I don't want to say Golden Axe or Streets of Rage, but it's sort of like that. Now, once you start to get to the newer console generations, you're able to actually expand that idea much wider. You're able to look at something like a fully alive New York City with citizens walking around doing something actually in the world. Unlike the 2000 Spider-Man game, which I still love dearly, you don't have to actually have gas fill the streets so that you have to get rid of all of the civilians. You don't have to actually abandon the entire city in order to make it believable because the technology just wasn't there. This is something that technology has held back in terms of the scale of the world and even in terms of mechanics. I mean, you look at the stiff mechanics of previous games web slinging compared to something like Spider-Man 2. Like the mid 2000s were where the web swinging mechanics actually started to make sense and be fleshed out, and the technology was rising to meet the demands of the character at this point. Now, as you sort of progress, these things went up and down in terms of budget and quality over the years, but you get now, finally, from Spider-Man 2 back to Marvel's Spider-Man, the 2018 current day game. That is where web swinging has again hit its peak. Why was that? Because people were willing to put the time, money, and technological resources behind the game in order to perfect the traversal system of Spider-Man, in order to make a game where you feel like Spider-Man. If Arkham made you feel like Batman, this is the feel like Spider-Man game. But the scale of the world really was held back by technology, and again, you have to ask these questions. How big do you want this game? What do you want your citizens to do? What are Spidey's interactions with the citizens and the villains? And then it comes down to combat. What do you do for combat? Because this actually does come down to the crux of one of the things I want to talk about, which is that I believe Spider-Man games have been held back over the years by feeling the need to always be inspired by something else on the market. You look again at something like Maximum Carnage, great game, but it's very clearly inspired by other beat-em-ups of the time. It's a product of that genre. It doesn't do a ton that's unique to it itself, but it's still a great game. You have something like Spider-Man on the PS1. Again, it's starting to push this revolutionary aspect of a more open world, but it's very clearly inspired by other games of the time that are starting to go into this action-oriented gameplay, but it was pushing it further than a lot of them. You know, you have something like The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. These are very clearly inspired heavily, actually super heavily, by the Arkham games at the time. The Amazing Spider-Man 1 had a pretty much cloned combat system from Arkham. It was just a little worse, and a very similar stealth gameplay style that you hadn't really seen much of in the Spider-Man franchise to that point. It was really popularized again by the Batman Arkham franchise. And then, what do Spider-Man game creators do? They look at the games around them in the superhero genres, in the RPG genres, in the action genres, and in my opinion, they sort of take those things, they wrap them up into a package, put a Spider-Man spin on it, and send it out the door. At least to a point. That is something that has held back Spider-Man. And it is something, too, that no matter how much we all love the PS4 Spider-Man, I think it would be a little disingenuous to say it's not still sort of a thing there. I mean, I love the combat, but it's very clearly inspired by Arkham combat again, and yet it's able to do its own thing. So is that a problem? This also comes down to the question of, is novelty what makes something good? I don't necessarily think it is. Sometimes taking the best things on the market, putting your own spin on it, and making it go out the door and be fantastic is good enough. That is great. And one of the big things that I think really does hold back Spider-Man's combat is the idea of health. Because you do see this in Marvel's Spider-Man. There's this idea of, like, how do we have the game be challenging? It's something I got a lot of flack for in my What Spider-Man Did Wrong video, and you know what? Rightfully so to some extent, because I understand challenge isn't something everyone cares about. But if you're actually looking at core video game players who, like, have grown up playing games, or at least have played them for probably more than 5 years, those people don't want to walk in the park. And frankly, the normal Spider-Man playthrough of the actual Marvel Spider-Man game of the story is pretty much a walk in the park on normal and on amazing. You know, once you get up to Ultimate, which had to be patched in, yes, it gets harder, but again, you had to go back and patch in a harder game mode in order to make it more difficult. Then you get to the City That Never Sleeps, and you start to see some different types of enemies with sable weaponry, and you start to see some higher weapon damage outputs. And again, it is hard, but is it hard for the right reason? Is a game being hard because enemies output a lot of damage per second, or is it because it's skill-based? And sort of where do you draw the line between those two things? Because again, I think that's something Spider-Man has always struggled with. Is this going to be skill-based, or is it going to be, you're Spider-Man, have a fun time, get out there, beat people up, web people up, whatever. And what do players want out of this? And for health, do you allow Spider-Man to heal in the middle of a battle? Because for me, that's something that actually held back Marvel Spider-Man a lot. Because yes, fully, I will admit, during the actual City That Never Sleeps portions, I needed this feature. I totally did. I needed to be able to heal because I made slip-ups. I got hit. I actually would make mistakes, web the wrong enemy, hit the wrong enemy, miss a dodge, miss a L1R1 to throw back a rocket. I get it. I've made mistakes in the DLC for this that caused me to need this function. But in the general game, in the main story that the majority of consumers experienced, did you need this feature? Because at the end of the day, it was so easy with this feature that you had to patch in an entirely harder difficulty mode just to make the game challenging to some people. I don't know. There's also the fact that because of all these games, you've had an overuse of ideas and an oversaturation of the market. Frankly, for a long time, the Spider-Man games looked fairly dead. There was just a lot of okay stuff, because a lot of it was sort of trying to copy previous games, trying to reiterate, trying to package Spider-Man and push him out in a slightly different way than before, and not doing anything new. Does novelty make something good? No. But if everything is the same or just a slight tweak on already existing ideas, the consumers and the marketplace don't see your idea as that special, and they're not going to gravitate towards it. So I don't know. This was just sort of a out loud rambling video. I'm sure some people will take issue with some of the stuff I said. That's totally fine. Before you comment about how terrible the video is or whatever, I would like to hear your reasoning. Did you like what I had to say? Do you dislike it? Do you agree or disagree? What do you think about Spider-Man games over the years? Are you willing to play anything that's a Spider-Man game because he's in it? I know some people are that way for characters. Or do you want specific things out of games? And what would you like to see the next Spider-Man game do better, or future games do better? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm actually really interested to read that and see your feedback on this video. And hey, be sure to check out the Discord link to join up with a community that talks about stuff like this all the time. We have a lot of fun over there. Be sure to check out the Twitter, the Reddit, the Instagram. We have a Patreon now if you feel inclined to support the channel. We appreciate you a lot. We are over 30,000 subscribers now. It is all thanks to you. Thank you for making this channel a part of your life. You have improved mine massively, and I appreciate you every day. Have a great one. I'll see you in the next one.